we're born with this pattern that wants to develop within us. And when we allow that pattern to come out, and when the elders and the parents and the aunts and uncles and the friends draw it out of us, we become a really beautiful version of ourselves, right?
Ja, willkommen zum Podcast fürs Leben. Mein Name ist Julia Talg und ja, ich freue mich total, dass du da bist, dass du dir jetzt die Zeit nimmst, hier zu sein. Und ja, ich bin total dankbar für diese neue Folge, die für mich tatsächlich sehr besonders ist. Sie ist mit Jon Young, einem meiner Mentoren, obwohl ich nicht direkt von ihm gementort wurde, sondern quasi von Menschen, die von ihm gelernt haben und direkt von ihm, bei ihm angedockt waren, habe ich gelernt. Und und ich hatte so einen großen Wunsch, direkt mit ihm in Kontakt zu gehen, weil ich gemerkt habe: „Boah, ich möchte wie zum Ursprung dahin, wo das herkommt.“ Das ganze Wissen, was mir so viel in meinem Leben, geschenkt hat, wo ich gemerkt habe, da möchte ich andocken. Und tatsächlich bin ich damit gegangen und habe irgendwie versucht, es möglich zu machen, immer wieder so: „Okay, hier, da geht's noch. Also, wo geht der Weg hin? Wie komme ich mit ihm in Kontakt?“ Ja, und ich kann einmal mehr sagen, ich bin dankbar für die Fügungen und Führungen des Lebens, wie die Sachen am Ende immer zusammenkommen. Und ja, so kam es, dass, wir uns connected haben und, tatsächlich sogar 2 Podcast-Folgen entstanden sind, diese, die jetzt hier ist. Und grade gestern wurde ich von ihm und seiner Partnerin Sarah, interviewt für deren Podcast. Und ich bin einfach berührt von Verbindung und für Verbindung und für tiefes, altes, verbundenes Wissen vom Leben, was weitergegeben wurde über Generationen, auch unter den widrigsten Umständen. Und einfach dafür, dass das Leben weitergeht und dass es um das Leben geht. Also, ja, ich glaube, so viel gibt's gar nicht zu sagen, zu dem. Ja, und für mich ist diese Folge besonders, weil Jon einfach Geschichten teilt, wie er als, Jugendlicher oder eigentlich noch vorher als Junge von einem, Mentor wie ein Mentor zu ihm kam, der Tom Brown Jr., und ihn auf eine traditionelle Weise, wie er es gelernt hat, also Tom gementort wurde von einem ältesten, quasi Grandfather, der Ursprung in Native American Culture hatte, also Kultur hatte. Und wie das weitergegeben wurde und wie klar war, das Wissen muss weitergegeben werden, die Art und Weise. Und das ist ja kein Wissen von hier oben, sondern es ist ein Wissen, was aus dem Körper kommt, aus der Anbindung kommt, aus dem Erlebten kommt und quasi eigentlich auf eine Weise, vielleicht würde man sagen, unsichtbar ist. Und damit meine ich nicht spirituell unsichtbar, sondern weil es gelebt wird. Es ist nichts, ich sage dir etwas, sondern ich lasse es dich erleben. Und so durfte eben Jon das erleben durch seinen Mentor. Und in dieser Folge erzählt er von ganz vielen Geschichten eigentlich, wie sein Weg ging, wie er das, was er erlebt hat und wie er das gelernt hat, so was zu ihm gekommen ist und was er seitdem in die Welt bringt. Und wovon ich ja dann auch quasi über andere Menschen von ihm gelernt habe und ich nur so bin: „Wow.“ Und eben ein großes, ich weiß gar nicht, Ding ist nicht der richtige Ausdruck, aber ein wichtiges Werkzeug, was ich so mit Jon in Verbindung bringe und was für mich so das ist, weil es geht um Verbindung. Es geht darum, wie können wir wieder als Menschen in Verbindung sein, leben mit dem Leben. Also ich als Julia alleine, aber auch wie wir gemeinsam als Menschen miteinander und wir als Menschen mit allem anderen Leben, mit allen anderen Wesen. So, es geht einfach um Verbindung und das ist so letzten Endes das, was Jon in die Welt bringt. Seit über wahrscheinlich 40, 50, 60, keine Ahnung, ich weiß es gerade nicht genau. Zahlen sind nicht so meine Stärke. Jahren so. Und er jetzt als Ältester letzten Endes auch da ist und, an 'nem anderen Punkt in seinem Leben schon steht. Und ja, wahrscheinlich sogar, so wie ich's auch von ihm gehört habe, zurückblicken kann auf das, was er schon wie er seiner Vision gefolgt ist, seinem Calling gefolgt ist und welche tiefe Vision, große Vision er in sich trägt fürs Leben. Ja, also ich freue mich total, das jetzt hier mit dir zu teilen, diese Folge, dieses Gespräch mit Jon Young. Es ist auf Englisch und, ja, aber ich glaube, es ist ganz einfach, auch wenn das nicht so leicht ist für dich zu verstehen, auf YouTube, die Untertitel einzustellen. Ja, ich bin total gespannt. Schreib mir voll gerne 'ne Mail an mail@juliateig.org oder in meinem Telegram-Kanal. Ja, oder auch hier auf YouTube kannst du auch Kommentare hinterlassen und teile es. Also, teile es mit der Welt, teile es da, wo es gebraucht ist. Ja, es ist so wichtig, für Verbindung zu gehen und dafür zu gehen, wo wir 'n Ruf spüren. Also, mit dem wünsche ich dir ganz viel Freude, Inspiration und ja, schicke dir viel Liebe. Welcome to my podcast, Podcast for Life. And yeah, my name is Julia Talk. Julia Talk. Yeah, it's actually my first episode that I'm holding in English. The first conversation I had with Jon Young in English. And I'm truly grateful for that, for the conversation with him, for the connection with him, for the stories that came out of or in the conversation with him, and yeah, truly grateful for what he is sharing and what he has been given to as a child, as a young boy, how he was mentored, that he could be, yeah, in service of life in a way, like sharing connection and supporting a healthy culture of connection. And I don't know how familiar you are with him and his, I don't know, I don't like the term work, with his service and his being and what he's sharing with the world. For me, in a nutshell, he is for me really a person who is going for connection, who lives connection in every cell and everything he's doing, and on a deeper level is really, yeah, it's for really on a deep level peace, like creating peace within ourselves, for ourselves, and yeah, in connection with others. And yeah, so in this episode, in this conversation, he's sharing, yeah, how his life path went through being mentored by Tom Brown Jr., his mentor, and how he learned in a really, like, not how to say, like, how he was mentored. And mentoring means not that I'm telling you what to do, but I'm accompanying you, I'm taking you where your curiosity is, where your, yeah, calling is. In a way, I'm seeing you and I'm taking you out or wherever it needs to go, so that, yeah, your aliveness can come out in a way. So yeah, it's really beautiful to listen to his stories from how he was mentored, and yeah, and also what came out of it in a way. How his life path then unfolded and unfolds, and now at his stage where he is at, more being more kind of an elder, how his vision is for life, for not just for his life, but for the bigger vision of life. Yes, so I leave it with this. I'm very curious what touches you, what new insights you've got through listening to the stories or conversation, and maybe which questions arose within you by listening. And yeah, just send me an email to mail@juliatalk.org. Yeah, so just enjoy the episode. Yes, hello, welcome, Jon. I'm so great you're here with me in my podcast and you followed my invitation. Yes, for this podcast interview.
Well, thank you, Yulia, for inviting me. I'm excited to talk with you.
Yes. I feel I have this impression or image of we just are here for storytelling in a way, like sharing stories and listening to stories. And yes, it's the frame of my podcast also to dive deeper into connection.
Yeah, good.
So and I want to appreciate that because for me it's also in a way special to connect here with you, because in a way it's my first time to personally, at least over the screen, to connect with you. And as I mentioned before, it's really interesting because my journey with the 8 shields and in a way, your work or what you're sharing, influenced my way or like my path over the 8, 9, almost 10 years with the nature connection where my journey started. And I'm sitting here with you and I'm just like, wow, I'm really, truly grateful. To be here.
Well, I'm really thankful for that you're out there doing good things with this in the world. It's really fun to hear about your podcast and all the conversations you've had. And we have a lot of friends in common, which is really nice as well. Yeah, Elka and Greg and Mickey, and it's great.
Yeah, and especially as I shared before, I'm here where you also have been in this region where I'm at the moment. You also have a connection to.
Yes, that's a beautiful place. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, maybe for starting, I just have this question, which I think I'm asking everybody who's in my podcast. Who are you? And maybe just who are you for now?
Who am I today? Well, I'm a father of six children. My oldest is 40 and my youngest is 15. And most of them are out there in the world doing their own thing. My oldest son, Aiden, is working with myself and Sarah in the work we do at Living Connection First. I live up in the mountains near Santa Cruz, California, just a few miles from the Pacific Ocean, on the west-facing slope, so up about 2,000 feet. It's a really quiet, beautiful place with lots of wilderness to the west and north. And I'm a naturalist. I love nature since I was a little boy. I've just been absolutely passionate about building relationships with all the beings out there and around us, and making that a very big part of my life. I was mentored as a boy by a master tracker, amazing mentor, really, Tom Brown Jr. And I was mentored in the way that he was mentored by his elder. As he says, I'm the only one who he had what he calls the luxury to mentor the way that grandfather mentored him. So I feel very fortunate that I was gifted with that path of the master tracker and bird language and all the knowledge of, the primitive skills, survival, and, wild plants, medicines, and foods. But I also studied a lot of science and studied ecology and biology and all the ologies, all of the ologies, geology, limnology, everything that helped me to understand the earth that we live on in as many different ways as I could. And I also studied anthropology. So I feel like I've been a kind of amateur anthropologist my whole life. Like I'm so interested in that, watching people, understanding systems, and all my knowledge of systems of nature, apply it to my understanding of systems of people. And so I guess, what who I am is really about understanding how human beings connect with one another in the most potent way, and how they connect to the earth in the most potent way, and to themselves, because you have to connect to all three. Really, we call it the three-legged stool. If you don't connect to yourself, then those other two don't go so well. If you don't connect to nature, you don't develop that awareness and sensitivity that allows you to be better at connecting with people. But if you don't connect with people, then you don't go very far in your nature connection journey. So they are all intertwined. So I really try to understand ways to support people, not just as individuals, but also more at scale, where we can help people all over the world to work with these same tools and hopefully improve their life experience, essentially, really, because I embrace connection as a topic because it's a healing force. And when I was first doing this 40 years ago, people didn't understand what the heck I was doing or why. But there's so much science now, so much
Mm.
science, neuroscience and psychology, and all these things are coming together to say we actually really need it, you know. So I was just, I guess, 40 years ahead of my time.
Mm.
But that's what
Wow.
I love to do. And I'm really grateful to have an opportunity to share about that with people here through your podcast, and also um just make this stronger connection with you. So yeah.
Mm. Wow. Thank you.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm already touched by your words.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yes. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Hmm. Yeah. So I have one question that's really thrilling me and takes my curiosity, which is, what was your calling 40 years ago? Or maybe it's still your calling, I guess, but what was it at the beginning?
Yeah, I would have to say the calling goes back a little bit before I kind of knew what I was doing. As callings often are like that, right? You get this kind of feeling you're supposed to be doing something, you feel pulled this way, you feel pulled that way, but you don't quite know what it is yet, So I think it started when I was about 15 or so. So going back to 1975, um, so that's almost 50 years ago, right? So that's why I'm saying this calling started sooner than my work. Um, I was going through a particularly difficult time in my life. Like I had at that point been with Tom Brown for like 5 years, and 5 years with a guy like Tom Brown really changes who you are in a really profound way. Um, but the problem was he wasn't also working with all my friends, and he wasn't working also with my family. So he was sort of leading me into this world that was expanding and becoming so beautiful and magical and powerful, but there wasn't really anyone in my life at my age that could relate to me, because I was almost like in a different universe at that point, you know? You could say my worldview had shifted so radically, but in a really good way. Like, I don't regret it. It's not like he was programming me or anything. What he was actually helping me to do was to expand into who I was in so many dimensions. But nobody else was really having that experience. So as I tried to connect with people around it, I kept hitting walls, and I started to feel really alone and really kind of sad and isolated and depressed. And um, everybody had girlfriends or boyfriends, but nobody was interested in me. Oh, he's the nice guy you can talk to at lunch, but you don't want to talk to him for too long because he's weird, that kind of feeling. So I think that's what kind of started it. And because I went into this really sort of dark place, Tom sat with me one day and he asked me a bunch of really powerful questions. And today, you probably know this, Julia, and maybe many of your listeners know Renewal of Creative Path that we do every year with the H. Shields Network. That came from this conversation when I was 15,
Wow.
right? One of the questions he asked was like, what helps me feel really connected, really happy, really alive, really vital? You know, like, when do I have the attributes? And he told me to list it all down, right? And then he told me to kind of look at the things in my life that made that not true and try to figure out where is this good stuff coming from and how to limit the stuff that's crushing me.
Mm.
And he said, you know, if I was going to imagine some ideal scene in the future, what might I do for a living that would allow me to have more of the things that make me feel alive and happy and vital and, you know, just full of life and thankful, you know, all the attributes of connection. And, you know, he had me do it, like, and then he would keep checking back with me, you know, on it, you know, so it wasn't like he just asked me the questions and let it go. He kept revisiting with me over the next months, you know. And it got to this point where I could really see and feel something coming from the mist that I knew was what I had to do, but I didn't know what it was. I could feel it, I could sense it, but I get electrified, you know, when I'm imagining being in that field, but I could not see a path forward. I couldn't see it. And you know, this went on. So now 16 and 17, you know, Tom opens his school when I turn 18 and I'm at university my first year. And I'm going to his school on the weekends to help him do carpentry, to help us get his barn ready for his first class and things like this. And we're sitting and talking still about this thing that he asked me when I was 15, right? And he's like, well, now that you're at school, maybe you can start to really look into this, right? And my freshman year, my first year at college, was basically a repeat of my senior year of high school. So my last year of school before college, I took all advanced science classes to get ready for college. But when I got to college, all the classes that they gave me were all the ones I'd already taken. So I was really bored and more frustrated. And I spent loads of time just out in the research forest at the university at my sit spot, loads of time. And I just had no problem getting really good grades because it was like, oh, you're just going to test me on all these things all over again, right? So um, I went from there and sat with Tom at his first class, and a bunch of people came, and I was intimidated by adults. I looked like I was 12 years old, even though I was 18. There was all these cars in the parking lot for this first class, right? Like 50 cars. And I looked at all the license plates, and these people had come from Canada, and they'd come from Alaska, and they'd come from Colorado. They'd come from all over the US. I'd never saw so many license plates in one parking lot. And that made me like really wonder, you know, why are they here? Why are they doing this? Coming to this weird guy's barn in the middle of this farmland in New Jersey, driving from Alaska was just insane to me. You know, it's like 5,000 miles, right? Through the Canadian wilderness. And, you know, just, it's not an easy thing to get to the US by car from Alaska, the lower US. And so I watched these people come to the first day of class, and they were kind of hunched over and they looked grumpy and they had like a film over their eyes and they weren't very nice to each other, to, you know, they hadn't opened up. And over the course of the week, I saw them opening like a flower. On the very last day, everybody had a light in their eyes and they were so moved, and like something had really forever changed in every single person in that first class. And I said to myself at that moment, whatever it was between Sunday and Saturday that caused that light, I want to understand that. That is what I want to focus on. I want to know how to do that for people, whatever that is.
Mhm.
I want to understand it, and I want to help support it. And I love working with Tom anyway, so I was always going up there every time I could and helping him teach and so on. Um, but yeah, that was sort of when the calling sort of got clear. I need to study this phenomenon of what connects people to the earth, what connects them to each other, what brings out that light. And I was working with Tom on that because remember, this renewal creative path, he kept working with me on it right through this time. And he's like, well, what do you think you want to study? If this first year was really boring, and I'm like, well, my dad wants me to go into solid waste industry to solve the garbage crisis, because if I can solve that, I'm helping the environment and I'll never lack for money. So my parents are trying to make me have a real job, right? And I'm like, but it's so boring. I took some of those classes just to please my parents, and I would hate my life if that's all I was doing. And he's like, well, what is it that you want to do? And I'm like, I don't know. I want to understand what you did for me as a boy, what Stalking Wolf did for you as a boy. I want to study this and see if I can find it out there in the world. And so I think I'm going to kind of minor in anthropology and minor in biology and chemistry and physics and geology and all the other ologies. Um, and I ended up taking 5 years instead of 4 because I got so deep into research. But it was pretty soon after that I met a professor, because you weren't in those days at that university, you weren't allowed to make up your own studies. You actually had to follow pre-med, or you had to follow, wildlife science or solid waste industry, or, like they had these pathways already for you. When I told my one professor what my vision was and what I really wanted to do, he says, you know what, John, very few people at your age have so much passion and so much clarity about what they want to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and talk to your advisor, and he's about to retire. And so he doesn't really care anyway. And I'm going to tell him to just approve everything, that I will talk to you and I'll spend the time with you to make sure you know what you're doing. And then I'll go tell him to sign. And that's how it happened. And he said, if at the office they should tell you, no, you can't do this, just remind them that you're paying their salary, not the other way around. It's your tuition that's paying them. And you can politely thank them for trying to direct me, but I already know where I'm going. And then he said, and if they have questions, have them talk to me. So he literally covered for me and allowed me to pursue my calling, which then became all about studying people in the world. And I wanted to find people on every continent. I didn't want it to just be about North America or Europe. I wanted it to go all over the world, to see that these are universal things. Because if they weren't true of people all over the world, then I didn't really want to study them, because I wanted it to bring us all together as a human family, not make us divide, right? And so I studied hunter-gatherer nomadic people from sandy places who had a tracking culture, because that's what my professors made me do. They're like, you have to pick one cultural kind of path. But that was perfect, because Tom Brown's mentor,
Yeah.
Stalking Wolf, was
Yeah,
from
Stalking Wolf.
Lipan Apache culture, which was from a hunter-gatherer nomadic tribe that was from a sandy place.
Yeah.
With a big tracking culture, obviously. But then, I ended up studying the Bushmen in pretty heavy ways. Once I was doing anthropology, I was studying Aboriginals in Australia, these various tribes from the Asian steppes. I went back pretty far into European lore to see if I could find similar archetypal patterns in my own bloodline, Ireland, Poland, um, and so, yeah, I was making these discoveries. And they're not discoveries. I was uncovering things that I wasn't aware of that was in the research. Watching all these old film reels of the Bushmen from back in when it was black and white, and I gathered all this and put it all together in one place and identified common patterns and said, okay, if I could figure out how to lift some of these universal patterns out and offer them to the world, then the first thing I'll do when I graduate is start with kids in my neighborhood where I grew up. And I'll start doing for them what Tom did for me. And then I'll train other adults eventually to understand how to do it so we can reach more kids, and that's pretty much what I did for first 12 years after I got out of college. Worked mostly with children, and then towards the last few years of that, I started to work more and more with adults because at that point they were getting curious. How are you getting these amazing results with these children? We don't understand what you're doing. Can you teach us how you're doing what you're doing? And that sort of gave rise to what later became the art of mentoring, right? And Eight Shields grew out of that as well, right?
To explain for people who maybe are not so familiar with Tom Brown and what you shared, no, the linkage. Maybe you can just share it or tell us a bit about it in a nutshell.
Well, just for people's sake, because you're right, I did not explain who Tom Brown was. So Tom Brown wrote his first book in 1978, and it's called The Tracker. And I know it was translated into German.
Mhm.
And then he wrote his next book, The Search. And then, now it's what, 40 something years later, he has something like 27 books now, I think. I kind of lost count. And he's been running this school since 1978, the Tracker School, it's called. He teaches all different sorts of things. He's even doing online classes now since 2012, which is, I think, great because I show up for all his classes to support him, and it's amazing what he's teaching. It's just beautiful. Anyway, he grew up in New Jersey. He was born in 1950, and he grew up in a time in America where there was a lot of paranoia about communists, and there was all this strange kind of oppressive stuff going on in America, right? All boys had to have buzz cuts, short hair, and they had to behave a certain way. There was a very, very, very strong culture of that. And when he was 7 years old, like most children, like probably you too, when we're young, we like to wander around and find things and watch butterflies and lay on our stomach and watch ants, So he's a child like that. And this is way before television really got started. Of course, there was no internet back in those days. And so children played outside a lot and wandered around and did their own thing. And parents didn't worry about it. Um, and that's how I grew up too. But in 1950, his parents lived at the edge of this place called the Pine Barrens, which is a big wilderness in the southern half of New Jersey. That's like 2 million acres. And it's a very beautiful, sublime, very interesting place. And they were in a neighborhood called Beechwood, which is right on the edge of this wilderness. And this little river, not much, really a stream that got wide before it hit the ocean, before it hit the bay, called the Toms River. And he was walking along this sandy beach. And every time after a storm, kids like to walk along the beach to see if any new fossils have come up, shark's teeth and these little hard like conical things that come from a squid. These were common fossils where I grew up, where he grew up. And so he was out fossil hunting after a storm, and there was another little boy who was also fossil hunting, and they kind of bumped into each other. And they were the same age, and they were really excited to meet another fossil hunter. And this boy was with his grandfather. And this grandfather was a Lipan Apache who had grown up, well, he grew up before there was, he was born in the 1800s, and he was a wild hunter-gatherer nomadic Apache as a child and into his whole adult life. And when the Apache Wars happened in the U.S., some Apaches fought, right? The Chiricahuas, they fought back against the cavalry in the United States. But some Apaches were peaceful and didn't want to fight, but they also didn't want to give up their way of life. And so they packed off and hid in the mountains, the Sierra Madres, and they just kind of stayed invisible. They would get jobs, for cash, fixing fences and things like that, but they didn't have birth certificates or driver's license. So they were just living on the edge. And this elder man came to New Jersey to be near his son, who was in the army at that point. Well, not in the army, but in the armed services. I think he was in the Navy, actually. I'm not sure. There were so many different Army and Navy bases in that place. I lose track. And that's how he ended up there. So because Tom's parents were both working, they both had full-time jobs, and Rick's parents were both working, they had full-time jobs. This elder man was the babysitter after school every day for these two young boys. And
Mhm.
he raised them in the way that he was brought up by his elders. And so that was this particular kind of mentoring, which I can share with you. What Tom writes about that in his book, The Tracker, it kind of helps you to understand how grandfather mentored him.
Mhm.
And really, then you would understand how he mentored me. But I wouldn't mind if you would like for me to share some stories about that, because you're right. I just breezed over that like everybody knows what I'm talking about, and no, you probably don't, and it's fair. If you think about this, I meet him in 1971.
How old
I,
have you been there? Like,
I was 10 years old when I met him, and that summer I turned 11. So I met him in like May or June, and then I was 11 in August. And so he was pretty much, well, he had said it like this. When I turned 21, he wrote to me and he said, when I was 21, you know, I remember coming to the street corner and seeing a boy with a common Eastern snapping turtle on a string, which was true. I'd caught this turtle and I got it as far as the corner of my neighborhood, but my friend left me there. He had to leave with his family, and now I was standing there. I had another half mile to go home. And he said to me in this letter, he said, when I asked this boy what he had there, he said a common Eastern snapping turtle. And Tom said to himself at that time, and he wrote this in the letter, that that was only half an answer. And did I
mm,
understand the symbolic significance of what the turtle represented to the native people of this land? And he was told by grandfather before grandfather left, to go back to his people, um, at the very end of his life. He had told Tom that he should watch for a person that would come to his life that he would mentor in the same way that grandfather had mentored him, and that grandfather had said to him, "You will know this person by the sign that he carries." And so what Tom said in that letter when I was 21, so this was now, 11 years later, right? He says, um, actually 10 years and a couple months later, he says, I saw that this boy had Mother Earth on a string.
mm,
And I asked myself, is that the sign that grandfather had, foretold? And at that point, he had said to me later that he had looked at so many children to see if they had any kind of sign that he could mentor them in the way that grandfather had mentored him. And when he met me that day, he saw that sign and decided to dig deeper to see if I had what it took, So, and I had no idea. He was literally interviewing me, I had no idea. This was an onboarding process. And I wasn't looking to be onboarded. You know what I mean? I didn't
mm.
know. I didn't know who this guy was. I didn't know what he knew.
Yeah.
I was just interested in frogs and turtles and fishing, and like if he could help me learn more about fishing and frogs and turtles, yay. That
Mhm.
was kind of where I was at. And if he was willing to take me to cool places that I could go fishing and help
Mhm.
me catch fish that I never caught before, well, that's all I need, motivation enough right there. So he came down that day into, so my parents' house had a basement down these stairs, and in the back of the house, the south facing side where the sun is shining, the house, the dirt is lower on that side of the house than on the front side, right? So the front is right even with the ground, but there's a little slope like this. So the back has a big window in the
Mhm.
basement, and it shines in and makes nice sun on the cement floor, right? So at that point, I had already put like this plastic pool that you would use for little kids in the yard. and I had it filled with water, and I had a little island in the middle, and I had wild turtles in there and wild fish that I caught, and they were all swimming around. And I had all these, people in those days, they'd buy aquariums for their kids to have fish and stuff. And then the kids wouldn't pay much attention. No one would clean the tank. And so the family would say, we're going to get rid of this aquarium. And we had this thing in our neighborhood where if you wanted to get rid of large items that you didn't want to throw away, you could put them on the curb, and they would pick them up and bring them to the right place so they could be used again if necessary, right?
Mhm.
So it's called Large Item Pickup Day. And it was so funny because everybody drove around during Large Item Pickup Day to see what was at the end of the driveway. Oh, look at that chair. We could use that. So it actually was a good thing, right? Well, I can't tell you how many fish tanks this boy got. I had maybe 15 of them. And in this one, there's a wild lizard that I caught. In this one, he's got the salamanders with, the habitat, and I would put little ferns in there. I'd like dig up patches of forest and bring it in and put it in. And I'd put like a little rotten log for the salamander and a bowl of water. And this one over here had a praying mantis, and this one over here. So I had one actually that had a small mammal that's shaped like a little sausage, and
Mhm.
he's got a little short tail like this, and these little legs that go like that. It's called a vole. It's not a mouse. Mice do this. They bounce when they run.
Yeah.
But this one goes in tunnels right under the grass. I know they
Ah.
have them in the UK. I don't know if they're in Germany, but
Hmm.
they're very common here, and they like when the grass gets tall, and
Hmm.
they run right along the top of the ground in these little subway tunnels, and they run
But
all
they're
over the
not
place.
going digging, no?
Well, they do have a hole where they go down to sleep, but
Mhm.
most of their activity is up on top.
Hmm.
But you don't really know they're there unless you spread the grass, right?
Hmm.
And you'll see their little highways. So anyway,
And you catch them.
well, this one ended up. So remember, this is a basement, right? So there's a concrete wall all around, and at the top of the concrete wall, there's like this flat spot all around where the wood comes down for the house. But there's a little spot about that wide, and there's these windows on the front of the house that are down below the level of the ground. So they got these half metal pipes against the house, and then there's a window that opens like this. And those windows are open down there when I'm down there, so I get fresh air because the big glass window doesn't open.
Mhm.
And my father's cutting the grass, and so one of these voles jumps down into that the window uh, well, and comes in the window, and then is running along the top of the wall. And I see it, and I'm like, whoa, a vole. So I didn't know what it was, actually. I didn't know what this thing was. I just knew it was a cool little mammal, so I caught it, right? I just got like a bucket, put it over top, and put it in its aquarium. And then I put like a section of grass in there for it. I just went and cut it like this, from a
Mhm.
place my mother wouldn't notice, and it fit perfectly in the tank. And then I gave him a cardboard tube from paper towels that he could run inside and hide, and a water bowl,
Yeah.
right? So all these things are down there, okay? And I'll just say, I wasn't like super worried about how clean the glass was. I wasn't worried about spider webs, and things getting dusty. I was just 10 years old, right?
Mhm.
But I love my animals. And so after Tom helps my father with this big turtle, then my dad says to him, Tom, you seem like an interesting young man. What do you do for a living? And he says, I'm a naturalist. And he said, oh, my son Jonathan is a naturalist too. Jonathan, why don't you take Tom downstairs and show him your nature museum? And I'm just like, I don't want adults down there. And because they annoy me, because they don't like
Yeah.
the smell, or they don't like the way it looks, and they don't understand why I have all these animals. And I never got good feedback from my parents' friends.
Mhm.
So he says, "Oh yeah, I'd love to see it." So I bring him downstairs, and the first thing he does is he's looking around at all these tanks with wild animals in him, right? And he sees this pool with the turtle swimming in it, and he's looking at me like, "Wow, this little kid has got some passion, right, for nature."
Mhm.
and he just starts asking me questions. And he goes over to this first tank. And so because the tank was in front of the big window and the sun is shining through the water to the top there, right? I got some wild fish in there, and I've got the larva of frogs, tadpole, pollywog. I don't know what you guys call them, but they got a little round head with a little tail, and they're in the water, and then they grow legs eventually, and then their tail shrinks.
Like the form of before they become a frog.
Yes.
Yes.
What do you call those?
Kaulquappen.
That's a great name. Yeah, so there's one for a kind of frog in this country that when it's big, when it grows up,
Wow.
its body is like this, okay? So when you hold it by the legs, it sticks out like this. It's called a bullfrog. And it can eat mice, it eats little birds, it eats all other frogs, right? Eats big bugs, worms. So I had one of his tadpoles in the tank. So he's as big around as my thumb.
Yeah.
And he's got a tail about, half a finger long. So he's big. And it takes 2 years in the water for this one to grow into a frog. Okay, because most all the other ones might only be a week or two. Some are a couple of months, but this one is 2 years because it gets really big. So I watched this thing. I caught it in a pond, and I had it in my tank. And I watched it growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And what it does is it goes up the glass because there's all this algae growing on the glass. It's green slime and brown slime. And it's eating its way up the glass, leaving a little trail of clean glass where it has eaten the algae, right? And so Tom comes over, and he's gets down on his hands and knees, and he looks right up against the window at this little thing eating up the algae, and he's got his finger and he's following it as it's going up, right? And he says, "What's that?" And I look at him like, "You don't know what that is?" Like, I didn't say that, but I'm like, "You don't know that? Everybody knows what that is." I didn't say that, but that's what I'm thinking. I said, "It's a tadpole." He says, "I know it's a tadpole, but what kind of tadpole? What kind of frog will it be?" And I said, "It's going to be a bullfrog." He says, "Well, how do you know that?" And I explained it to him. I said, "I caught it when it was small, and it's been in here for several months. It's getting really big. Bullfrogs take 2 years, so it's a bullfrog." And he goes, "Huh." And then he goes over to the vole, and it's running around the tank, because if you get too close to it, you scare it. So I always kind of gave it space, right? I, by the way, didn't keep all these wild things forever. I keep them for a little while, and then I let them go again, right? Because that's how my grandmother raised me. Keep them until you're not interested in them anymore. When you lose your curiosity, then you have to take it back and put it back with its friends and family exactly where you caught it. That was her rule with me growing up. That's where I learned this whole tank thing from my grandmother. And so he comes over to the vole, and it's running all around inside this thing, and he says, "What's that?" And I said, "It's a vole." He says, "A vole?" And I said, "Yeah, a vole." He said, "What's a vole?" And I said, That's a vole, right?" So he's looking at me like kind of irritated. "What does it eat?" And I'm like, "Grass." He's like, "How do you know?" I said, "Because I put grass in here and he ate it all. And now his poop is all green. See? He eats grass." He's like, "Huh." Right? So he was really good at being curious and playing dumb. He knew dang well what a vole was. He knew what a bullfrog was. He's asking me to talk about what I know. He's not telling me what he knows. And he never did. Never did. For the next, until 1978, I had no idea who this guy was. All I knew was that he was super interested in hearing my stories and would ask me the coolest questions. And every time I told him a story, he would always ask a question that made me want to go back and look again or look deeper or find that next thing. And he made me get a sit spot when I was 10. He said, I'll take you to the coolest fishing place you've ever been. Because I didn't want to do the sit spot thing. He
What
said,
is the sit spot thing? Maybe in short.
yeah. Okay, so just going out to the same place every day and sitting under a tree, right? I thought, why would I do that? Like, that's boring. Like, I can sit still if I have a fishing pole, I can be as still as a rock. But why would I sit under a tree in the middle of the woods? What am I doing here? Like, I didn't understand why he wanted me to do that. But he wanted me to go every single day to the same spot and just sit and look around and come back and tell him what I noticed, right? And he eventually realized I wasn't going to do the sit spot thing. So he said, I want to take you to the best place for catfish in the Pine Barrens, and you can catch American eels there. And he knew I really wanted to catch American eels because I had told him so. Because my uncle would take my older cousins eel fishing at night, but I was too young and I really felt left out. And I wanted to catch eels because they always came back and talked about how fun it was to catch eels and how delicious they were and all this. So he said to me, and they even have American eels, and you'll catch so many catfish you won't know what to do, and the eels are huge and blah, blah, blah. He says, but I can't take you there until you practice camping. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, I mean, you can't sit still. You're always moving around. You have to learn to be still and to settle down and to be really aware. I can't take you to this place unless you practice camping. I'm like, what does that look like? He's like, well, I want you to go in the forest and find a spot where you can sit. And eventually I'll help you learn how to build a little fire there and make a little ring so to keep the fire safe. And then you don't have to spend the night there. You can just go there for a half hour, an hour every day. And then you have to tell me about your experiences. So he held out that bait. And I started going every day. And first couple of weeks, I thought it was the dumbest thing in the world. Like, I absolutely couldn't understand why anyone would just go and sit in the woods, have mosquitoes biting, and just like, what am I doing here? This is dumb, right? But when I'd get home at night, he would call me every single night around dinner
He
time.
would
So
call you?
he would call me because he would know it's getting dark, so he knows I'm coming back. So whether I was at my sit spot or I was fishing, but usually I did both. Like, I bring my fishing pole and my tackle, bring it to my sit spot, put it down, sit there for, he made me sit for 20 minutes, and then it became 40 minutes, and it became an hour, right? And then I'd go fishing, and then I'd come home. Okay. So then I'd get this call right after dark, and the phone would ring, and my mother would answer, and she said, yes, Tom, John's right here. John, Tom's on the phone, right? So get on the phone. He's like, hey, what'd you do today? I'm like, yeah, I went over to my sit area. It wasn't a sit area. I went over to that spot in Drucker's Woods, my practicing camping plots. And what happened? Like my first day there, he says, where did you sit? I said, well, I sat like on this top of this little hill, because he told me, find a place where there was like a hill where you could see really kind of far down ahead of you, and that behind you there should be some thick brush so nothing can sneak up on you without you knowing. And he said, because you never know what's out there, which of course just gave me the total creeps, right? I'm just like, oh, like what, a murderer or what? Someone who's going to eat children, bears, wolves, like what's back there, So anyway, I looked, make sure there was a thick place behind me. There was a nice little hill that had a nice view out into this forest that had open spots. It was actually a really good sit spot, honestly, looking back. Didn't have a creek or anything, but didn't matter because there was a lot of cool stuff that went on there over the 8 years I spent there.
Wow.
And, first day, I lean against this tree, and it's a pretty tall tree. It's probably maybe this big around, right? So when I lean against it, there's still tree on either side of me before it goes around, right? And the ground was kind of soft and a little bit open, and there was a nice level spot, which I thought at some point that could be where my fire goes, right? And so I sat there. It was getting close to sundown, and I could see the sun kind of coming down in the sky. It wasn't touching the earth. It was up pretty high, but it was that golden light coming through. When I sat there for like 20 minutes, and I'm like, okay, enough, and I get up and I leave. So this is my first day there. So just give you an idea how this questioning goes, okay? 1971, 10 years old, calls me up and he says, so, did you find a spot? And I said, yeah. He said, well, where is it? Tell me how you got there. I said, well, I went across my parents' front yard and I went up to the end of the cul-de-sac by the Druckers and went up into the woods there. And then I kind of stood there in the woods and kind of like, where's the spot? I didn't want to make it far away because if it was too far, I'd never go. So I kind of looked and I saw that there was a hill over there through the forest and it kind of dropped down and I'll go check that out. So I kind of picked my way through the woods. There wasn't a trail. And I found a spot where there was like this line of thicket brush, bushes going north to south. Although at that time I didn't know north from east from west, but it was going in a straight line in the direction I was traveling. So I'm walking on the left side of it so I could see this little hill.
Mhm.
And I got to a spot where I could walk out to this level spot and then I could see. So I explained that to him. He's like, you said you leaned against a tree. Which way were you facing? I said, away from the tree. He's like, no, 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 no. Were you facing east? Were you facing west? I'm like, I don't know. Did you see the sun? Yeah. Where was it? It was kind of in front of me, kind of low. And he
Mhm.
says, what direction does the sun set? And I said, west? He's like, does it? And I'm like, I think so. He's like, so what direction were you facing? I said, west, I guess. Tell me about the tree. Oh, it was a really straight tree, grew really tall. Well, what kind of branches did it have? Were they the branches that come out like this, or did they come out like this? Like were they alternate or opposite? Like, he's talking to me on the phone, so he's trying to explain to me what this looks like.
Mhm.
And I said, I don't know. I'll find out tomorrow. He said, yeah, I really want to know. It'd be interesting, So this is what he did every day. So first thing I get off the phone, I say to my mom and dad, what direction does the sun set in, Mom? Well, west, Jonathan. Oh, you sure? Yeah, yeah. It sets in the west. I'm like, well, Mom, which way is west here at the house? She says, well, the house faces south in the back. That's why the sun comes in that basement for you. And so west is over there. I'm like, okay. Like never occurred to this 10-year-old boy to think about that. But
Mm.
every day he did this to me. And every day he added something. Well, so the next day I go back to this tree and I look at it and it's not straight at all. It's crooked. And I see the branches are growing opposite. So I'm like, yeah, I can tell them. They like arms on a body, they right across from each other, you know.
Uh,
So it took a while, but eventually he got me to figure out that this was an ash tree.
mm.
And, like pretty soon, within a year or two, I knew the kinds of all the trees around my sit spot. There was 25 different kinds of trees and shrubs growing around there. I knew the names of all of them, but he never told me ever what the names of these things were. He just asked good questions. And then he showed me how to use field guides. And so I learned how to look things up. My grandmother always helped me look things up anyway, so I was good at looking things up, But that was long before the internet, right? So much easier now. Now people go take a picture with their phone and then they put it in an app and all of a sudden they know what kind of tree it is, right? Like it wasn't like that. It was, and I think that's great. I'm happy that people can learn quickly because this took a long time for me.
Mm.
So now I'm probably 12, 13 years old. I don't really have memories from my sit spot. But at this point, I have a fireplace. I've burned every kind of wood in my forest to see which one gives off heat with no smoke, which one gives light, which one burns the fastest, which one makes the coals. These are all questions he's asking me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now I know all the survival value of all the firewood, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Which one makes smoke? So if you wanted to smoke a fish, to make it right,
Wow.
to preserve, right?
Yeah.
Because I was mad about fishing. So he asked me, like, hey, if I was in the wilderness and I had to keep my fish without a refrigerator, how would I do it? And
Mm-hmm.
then I learned about smoking. I came back and said, oh, I asked my grandmother, and she said, well, we used to smoke fish when we were little. Grandpa and my uncle would go get all these fish, and we'd make this fire and we'd burn this wood under it. It would make this smoke. I don't know what kind of wood it was, Jonathan, but maybe you could figure it out. So my grandmother and Tom are kind of working on me from both sides, right? But all of this through questions. But
Yeah.
more than anything, him being really interested in my stories and
Mm-hmm.
taking the time to really listen. But he wasn't just listening. Like I like to say, there's people who listen to your story and you don't feel resistance, right? And sometimes you tell a story to someone, but you can kind of feel resistance, even though they're not saying anything. They're being quiet with their mouth, but their mind is busy, and you can feel your story bumping into a wall.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels uncomfortable to tell a story to a person who's not listening.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's people who listen. And when you tell them the story, you feel free to tell it, and moves easily out of you towards them. But then there's people who are listening to your story. They're like leaning in and they're listening, and they're waiting for something in that story that they can grab hold of and
Mm-hmm.
pull on it, right? And I like to think of Tom as he was like one of those we call them shop vacuum, that you use to vacuum up industrial waste. He was like a shop vac for stories, because he had so much suction coming out of me. Like I tell my story and I feel like, whoa, like my stories would be like being pulled out of me in this really powerful way, and then I would start to see things in my own story that I never would have realized, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I could put the pieces together, but he would ask just the right questions to get me to make these connections, and always, always, always to go back the next day and to take it further,
Mm-hmm.
right? So pretty soon I'm carrying all these questions with me whenever I'm walking in the forest, right? This is me expanding now, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm listening really well, I'm watching, right? I'm smelling everything, like I'm using all my senses, right? And I'm building a map of my head of my place, because he makes me draw maps in my journal all the time of where I went, and we have to name the places so I can tell the story and thread together the named places while I was storytelling, so he could follow me in the air while I was sharing stories with him, right? So it was like telling stories to him, it just got more and more complex and more developed and more beautiful over time, like a video game going up levels or something, right? Um, yeah, it was just extraordinary. Um, but I have one important story to say about what happened when I was 12. I'm 12 years old. I'm sitting against this green ash tree, which is not straight but crooked. I know what direction I'm facing. I have my fire ring. I know how to keep the fire going. I actually am at the point now, and I've been at this point for maybe more than a year and a half, where when I get off the school bus and come home, I don't feel like going to my sit spot is a chore or something I don't want to do. I even sometimes take my books, my backpack, and I put them under the bushes at the neighbors, and I go straight to the sit spot instead of going to my house, right? Like I actually love going there now. So it's like it's really cool for me now. And I think what makes it cool is that I'm going to get lots of questions, and I get to tell stories. Like it's such a beautiful cycle, right? It's just building. The longer I go there, the more this place is me, and I am this place. Hard to put in words, but this is what's happening to me. And if I don't, like, if we have to travel and go away for a couple days, I miss it.
Mm-hmm.
I miss my sit spot, right? So it's really beautiful now what's happening with my sit spot and me. And one day I'm sitting there, And I get this feeling, it's like funny. It's just like, it's kind of feeling like something's up. I don't know what, like somebody's watching me, or I don't know how to explain it, but I just got this sudden feeling, and I kind of leaned around the tree and looked behind me. But all I see is that thick bush that is going, now I can tell you it's going from north to south, because I now know all the directions, right? Turns out that there used to be a fence there a long, long time ago. And because there was a fence, the birds would sit on it and they would poop, and there were seeds in their poop, and all these bushes grew that made berries and had thorns on them, like there was elderberry, there was spice bush, there was Virginia creeper vines, there was honeysuckle vines. So it was like this kind of wall of bushes, like a hedge almost, right? But it wasn't man-made. The fence had long ago rotted away. There were some old rotten fence posts here and there that you could find, but down the middle of this hedge, I hear something is moving through there, and I noticed on the top of the hedge, there's these birds that are sitting on the top, and they're looking down into the hedge, and they're making this loud sound. They're like shouting, cheer, 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 like this one bird, the junco, he's making this kind of like a regular sound that's getting faster and faster and faster, and he's looking down, and then he starts to slow down. So it's like something went under him, is kind of what I was thinking, but I couldn't see that something. A little bit further, this other bird called the wren, Soundkönig, making a sound, a loud sound. And I don't know the names of these birds, but I've been seeing them at my sit spot, so I recognize them as, I recognize them, but I haven't identified all of them yet. A little further, I recognize the sound of a chipmunk, a small squirrel that goes down a hole in the ground. And what, Eichhornchen, yeah? No, that's a squirrel, but a little one with the stripes on his back. And he makes a sound and runs down his hole. And all this is going north, south to north. And as I listen to the north, more and more sounds in the distance. There's something moving that I can't see, but the birds are telling me about it. This is the first time I noticed it in that subtle way. I had seen crows coming and yelling at a hawk on a tree, but I had never seen this one kind of bird, different kind of bird, chipmunk, another bird, and I'm like, whoa, what was that? Something just happened. So I go around behind my tree and I go to the edge of that thicket and I look at it, and there's no poison ivy there, so I know I can go in. So I kind of pull some of the brush apart and I crawl inside, and I see there's a tunnel that's going south to north right through the middle of this hedge, and it's got a wide bottom, it's flat, and it's kind of like an archway, like a tunnel. It's kind of big enough for me just barely to kind of squeeze it down through. I go through this thing, and I notice there's spider webs on the right and on the left, all in the branches, but there's no spider webs straight ahead. It's like totally clean of spider webs. And I'm like, wow. So I crawl down it, and eventually the bushes come to an end and I could stand up. And then I noticed on the leaves going through the forest that the leaves were a little bit pushed down and a little bit discolored from feet going back and forth like a stripe. If I looked right at it, I couldn't really see it, but if I went into my wide-angle vision, my owl eyes, I could see it very lightly. And so I start following this trail. It's going right north, and it gets to this place where it crosses a sand road that I know very well, that I walk to go fishing on all the time. I suddenly realize where I am. And on the ground are fresh tracks in the sand going north. And I'm looking at these tracks, and I'm like, I've been seeing these tracks while I'm fishing, and I don't know what they are. And I smell the smell, which has a very particular kind of skunky smell. You don't have skunks in Europe, but it's kind of, I don't know how to, like, pungent, kind of oily, but very noticeable. And I've been smelling that on my way fishing all the time. And there's this animal scat, a turd, a poop on the ground. in this spot, and I've seen that poop because I walk on this road all the time, and there's always one right at that tree where I came out, and it's always got that skunky smell. And all these questions from the past are starting to weave together into this present moment, and I'm like, whatever that was went through here is the same one who makes that scat. It's the same one who makes that smell. I need to know who this is. And I just run all the way to Tom's house. Okay, it's about maybe 3/4 of a mile, so maybe a kilometer or so, right, to his house. I get there, I'm all out of breath, right? And he sees me, he's like, "What are you doing?" He's working on his car in his garage, working on his motor. I said, "What happened?" He said. I'm like, "I gotta tell you what just happened." He's like, "Well, what?" I'm like, "I gotta catch my breath, you know." He's like, all right, calm down, just breathe. So I breathe. I'm like, okay. And I told him the whole story I just told you. He's like, huh. So do you think something went by you that could see you, but you couldn't see it? And I said, I think so. So you think those birds and chipmunk were telling you that it was passing? I'm like, yeah, that really seemed to have happened. Like, how do you know? And I told him again, you know. He's like, huh. He's like, and then you looked at the track. Tell me about the track. So I described it as best I could, you know. And he says, so what do you think it is? I said, I don't know. It's like some kind of dog. He's like, a dog? A house dog? Like, I don't know. I don't think so. Like some kind of small wild dog. He's like, what kind of small wild dog would it be, John? And I said, I don't know. Fox? He says, are there foxes here? I'm like, I don't know. You don't know? He's like, hang on a minute. So he goes inside and he gets this book called Field Guide to Mammals, Peterson Field Guide to Mammals. He brings it down to me. He says, you know how to read a range map? And I'm like, yep, my grandmother taught me that when I was little. I know how to read a range map. He says, go through this book tonight, and I want you to write down the names of every mammal in this book that appears on the range map to be here where we live. Every one. And if in the morning, when I pick you up, I'll pick you up and drive you to school tomorrow. Don't go out on the bus. Wait for me. I'll pick you up and give you a ride to school tomorrow. If you hand me that list and you did it, I'll let you keep the book. So I went through all that book so thoroughly. I wrote down every single mammal. He also wanted me to write the Latin name. And I ended up with 2 kinds of foxes living by me. And I had no idea that foxes lived near us. Never thought of it. Never crossed my mind. I was so blown away. I knew it was a red fox now. And he says to me, I'll pick you up at school after school today, which he would do, not every day, but often. And he said, I want to talk to you after school. So after school, he picks me up and we come back to my house, and he says, you know, you told me yesterday that when you went into that thicket and you found that tunnel that went south to north, there was no spider webs in there, like that it was being regularly used. Is that what you meant? I'm like, yeah, it must be getting regularly used, because there were spider webs all around it, in the bushes, in the branches, but nothing on that tunnel. It was like so clean and clear. And there was that worn spot where things had been going back and forth. Even I could see it on the leaves when there was no bushes. He's like, right. So would you say animals are in that tunnel every day, once a day, once a week? And I'm like, whoa, yeah, it kind of looks like every day. He's like, okay, so you've been sitting at your sit spot now for going on 3 years. So let's call it, 300 times 3. Let's call it 1,000 days. Fair? And I'm like, yeah. Been going about an hour each time. I'm like, yeah, that's fair. He's like, so 1,000 hours you've been sitting there. I'm like, yeah. He's like, do you think in the last 1,000 hours, that's the first time something has walked through that tunnel while you were sitting there that you didn't know? And I'm like, probably not. He's like, why did you notice it this time? I'm like, because I heard the birds. I had a feeling and I heard birds. He said, if I was you, I wouldn't let that fox get the better of me again. I would be looking to get the better of that fox. And that's all it took. From that point on, I stopped thinking while I was at my sit spot. I just listened. I was so invested in hearing these bird sounds from a distance so that I would know if that fox was coming long before it got there, right? And then he kept asking me questions about what I was learning from listening to the birds so hard. That's how I learned bird language. And of course, that's exactly how the Apaches taught it to the children, because they all had to know bird language in order to be scouts, because that was part of their tradition. And that's how Tom was raised. And I wouldn't have written the book, What the Robin Knows, How the Birds Reveal the Secret of the Natural World, if it wasn't for this mentoring. Like, it couldn't have happened, right? By the time I was 18, I knew all the bird language of my area. Like, there was nothing, nobody could pull tricks on me, because I knew people were coming a long time. I knew when a horseback rider was coming, right? I knew when the hawks were coming and where the owls were and where the fox was and where the house cat was, all of this, because he asked really good questions. That's the mentoring, that, and that's kind of one dimension of it. There's other parts of it too, which obviously we can't get into, but here, but yeah, to give you an idea of what a very talented mentor he was. But he wouldn't have been a talented mentor if he himself wasn't mentored that way when he was little, right? So that's a traditional way of mentoring.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Thank you, Jon, for sharing stories. Mm. 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 Yeah, maybe I just have this image of coming more into, yeah, in a way, maybe the deeper reflection of of that what you shared. Um, yeah, in a way, like bringing it together to the point from the last decades, what you've shared. I mean, you shared certain points before, no, like aspects of the things that evolved through your own investigation. I mean, through the mentoring you received when you were a child, and then also in your teenage years, and from your own experiencing. And then, as I understood it now, or as I heard it from you, with this, yeah, going deeper into the anthropology aspect of investigating, yeah, culture in a way, or people, connected cultures all over the world, especially this trekking culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you like to share maybe a bit more now. Okay, how then, because you shared that, and I found that very important point more at the beginning of our conversation. You shared that with when you visited Tom's school, the tracker school, and you had this 1 week, and you said like, okay, I want to know if that's what's needed for people to bring out their light. What is it? And this, I understood, brought you all to this journey, I guess, of all the decades you've been doing or sharing, investigating, going deeper into your, growing deeper also in your, yeah, work. I don't know if it's work, it's maybe all what you are. I mean, maybe there's a better word for that, but yeah, the maybe, I don't know what's the question around behind that, but more, how would you express what is it what brought it together now, or what was it what what is evolved. I mean, we talked a bit about the 8 shields, and I would say it's too big to explain it in the fullness. We could make a different episode about that, of course, but maybe more in the essence of it. What is it? What then, from your own experience, and I mean, in a way, as at least from my point of view, from what I experienced, it's everything what you shared is part of that, of this, what we need for a culture that is connective.
You know, in 1983, when I finished college, I had pulled together all this information into this, binder, basically. And I'd organized it all, because I wasn't just researching for research sake. I was literally trying to pull out the things that I could use to work with children, right? And parents and stuff. So I had all this stuff gathered, and in 1983, I met this elder who also grew up the way Tom did, but he grew up with the Akamba and the Bushmen, and he was from South Africa. And then he spent from the age of 6 into his 40s in Kenya with
You
the
mean
Akamba. Ingwe.
Yeah.
Ingwe, yep.
Yeah.
And so he really loved my research. Like, he was like, this is really awesome what you've pulled out, because this is how I was raised by the Akamba and by the Bushmen, and this is how you were raised, and no doubt how Tom Brown was raised with Stalking Wolf, right? And Tom and Ingwe and I would get together and we would talk about this stuff, right? And so Ingwe wanted to organize it into a pattern where it could be shared with other people easily, because there are so many layers to it, right? You could easily get lost in the amount of information, and some of it is for beginners and some of it is for more motivated people, more focused people. So there's layers of it, right? And there's categories. Some of it pertains to basic nature awareness, some to tracking, some to hazards, things you need to know about, some for survival skills. So Ingwe devised this way of organizing it according to the directions. He didn't want to use A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. He wanted it to be like the sunrise category, this midday category, the sunset category, right? And we started with 6 categories, one for each of the 4 cardinal directions, one for the sky, one for the earth. And then later we expanded it to 8 categories because it seemed unbalanced. It seemed like we had northeast and southwest, up and down, like the XYZ axis that shows 3 dimensions. But then when you looked at it in 2 dimensions, it looked weird because there was 2 blank spots. So then we eventually added 2 more directions and reorganized everything so it fit neatly into these 8 patterns. And that's the 8 shields. It's kind of a design principles based on the 8 times of day, the feelings of the 8 times a day, the feelings of 8 times of year: spring, halfway between spring and summer, summer solstice, halfway between summer solstice and autumn equinox, and so on. These 8 feelings of time of year, and it just there's layers and layers of how to play with those archetypes and see them repeated in nature in many different ways. So that's the 8 shields in a nutshell. It makes it easier to track all this complex information, because if you didn't grow up this way, if you did grow up this way, first of all, you would probably not even think about it, because you would intuitively know what to do with little children, what to do with older children, because when you were little, your grandmothers did this, and when you were an older child, your uncle did that. So it's sort of in your body, right? So you don't need a map when you're growing up this way. If you grew up as a Bushman, they just don't even believe that we don't even know this. They're just like, what do you mean you don't know this? How could you be alive? I'm like, yeah, that's the point. So for people who didn't grow up this way, we kind of need to be very more intentional with our design, to make sure that we don't bring patterns of disconnection forward without knowing we're doing it, right? And that's why we created this model to help people, like a map, essentially, right? And why is it important? Well, we're all born, and I referenced this earlier, when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, I just wanted to wander around in nature and get to know the butterfly and the animals and the frogs, and we're all born with a deep instinct to do that. And Tom Brown calls it our birthright. I think that's a good name for it. It's like we're born with this pattern that wants to develop within us. And when we allow that pattern to come out, and when the elders and the parents and the aunts and uncles and the friends draw it out of us, we become a really beautiful version of ourselves, right? We're happier, we're more vital, we have the ability to listen to each other's stories the way Tom listened to me. We have empathy, we have a sense of how to be helpful in a really good way for the people and the earth. We have this feeling of gratitude all the time. We have love. We have a very quiet mind and access to creativity and intuition. You know, these are the benefits of connection, right? And you rarely see people with those attributes of connection in modern times. But when you bring a person to those attributes through connection, they don't want to go back to what they were doing before, ever. It's a one-way journey. It's like when people discover this, they're like, oh God, I need this, and I need my family to have this, and I need to help other people have this, right? It's a knowing. And I grew up in a place, in a time where the people around me, the modern people around me, were so disconnected. And they didn't know they were disconnected. And they didn't know that they were unconsciously kind of hurting the young people in their life who had instincts to find this birthright, right? But it was trained out of them as children, and so they feel like their job is to train it out of the next generation of children, which is why I had this conflicted boyhood, why I got depressed when I was 15, going all the way to back at the beginning of this conversation, right? In all the years that I trained the hundreds and hundreds of teenagers that I raised with this, I raised them together so they would have friends to hang out with, because when I was a kid, I was the only kid being mentored this way. And I'm like, the way to heal this is to raise a bunch of teenagers together so they can form their own little, we call them rat packs here, they just sort of gang up together and they form their cool little social group, right?
Yeah.
But if the whole social group is doing the nature connection journey, you have never met healthier, happier, more beautiful teenagers. They don't go into this depression place like I did, right? They understand the value of connection to self, to each other, to nature, right? They become these beautiful role models when they get to be young adults. And that's why we need this connective culture. But again, people don't, if they weren't raised this way, they may not know how to do it, which is why we have to do things like the 8 Shields Masterclass, for instance, to give people a framework and kind of get them to be like, whoa, okay, I need to step back and do a little self-analysis here and figure out where I'm on the journey, and where I can start and where am I called? Because as you started this whole thing around calling, I think that's the most important thing. There's so many ways we can go, but where do we feel called to go, right?
Yeah, it's true. We couldn't be here without connection. It's
very
it's
interesting.
our birthright, as you said. It's our birthright. We couldn't be here without connection.
Yes, it's true. We can be here without connection, but it's like the Bushmen say, when I told them this story about how disconnected people were, and when I had asked them about, why did you do that with that child? How come you knew to do that? They're like, that's what we do as Bushmen. I'm like, okay, but how did you learn to do that? I don't know, that's what we do. And then finally they say, oh no, that's what my grandmother did with me when I was that age, right? So they always reference back. And when I told them that, people don't know how to do that in this time in my life, in the modern times. And the old woman, she goes, how could they live like this? And she got really sad. And then when because it got translated and all the other Bushmen elders heard this, they all looked at each other and they all kind of shook their heads and they got sad. And I said, if you ask people the right question, I think they would admit that they don't feel like they're living their life in modern times. And she said, well, we want to help you. We want to help these people to be happy like we are. And I'm like, well, you already are. You've already been so generous with your knowledge and understanding of how to do this stuff, But yeah, I think it really boils down to that, right? It's like we thrive with connection. We thrive.
Yeah.
And when we don't have it, we don't know that we don't have it. But life kind of feels weird, off. I feel lost. I don't know what I'm doing. Is it worth it? Am I wasting my life? Like people who are really connected, they don't think that way. I've never felt like I was wasting my life. Like I followed that calling, and once it got clear, I have known what I'm waking up for every day ever since, and I get so much joy from it, so much passion in it. It's like this is what I live for. And like you say it's my work, and I'm funny too. I can't call it work. Like I will sometimes say the work I do, but it's not work. It's like I wouldn't be doing anything else. So is it work? It's my life. I love it. I'm living my life in service with my gift, my vision, my passion, right? That's it.
Yeah, totally. The closure, what is your vision also for now, and maybe like for now, for what comes next for you, but maybe also the bigger vision, what you feel you are living into, which is bigger, just not about what you are doing in the next decades, but more like what you are planting or nourishing.
Yeah, I think the vision is obviously something that has a life of its own, and it evolves as we evolve, right? So you can't pin it down to a nice clean statement. But what I can say about the vision is that we all know the Earth's systems are challenged to support life, right? And we all know that things could change really quickly, positive or negative. And I feel like just from having watched people that came from a disconnected background who were adults when they started on this path, to see how their life changed and to see how they are getting all the benefits of connection and how they're then blessing their families and their friends, right? It never goes the other way. So I think, okay, out of the 7-8 billion people on the planet, how many of them need this connection? Full connection. So the vision is simple. If people can only go in that one direction towards peace, love, and joy, and helping the earth and helping each other, then the vision is simply, let's get everybody on the planet here as soon as we possibly can. Because I think if we did, there would be a possible future that would be really good. And I can see that many of the problems that are happening on the earth, and the problems with people fighting with each other and war and politics and all that, it's all symptoms of disconnection. Right? So I feel like, the mission therefore is, how do we help as many as possible with these tools? That's the mission. But yeah, that will define the rest of my life, I'm sure.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just had this image while listening to your words. I'm not sure, did Brian share this with the fire of the 8 Shields in the 8 Shields masterclass? Didn't he?
Yeah.
Bring that image in? That
Yep.
we all connect to the fire.
Yep.
And I think this is for me also this image of that, like that we are all, I mean, each of us can do that, and we can all bring that together, tending this fire. If we, I mean, what you also said, maybe not now, but in the Healthiest masterclass, like the work, the basic layer is peace. It's a work for peace.
Yep,
This the layer behind it, or like
exactly.
beneath it. And so I feel, yeah, maybe this is also for all that listened to our conversation. Yeah, that's the empowerment that we can all tend the fire together and connect to that mission or vision. Maybe it's, of course, everybody has a different perspective to that, or part of it, or tends a different part of the fire, and still we can all tend and nourish this fire together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that.
Mm.
That was Gailey who wrote that meditation. You know Gailey Bachman?
True. Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, beautiful. Yeah, it comes all together. And maybe one last thing to that I like to add, because it also really made it for me more or clearer why it needs us all together in community. What you shared last time in the Healthiest masterclass, that the vision, or maybe you can also then share it in your own words again, but at least the point I understood is our visions, the visions we hold, they need the community to ground it. And so it really, yeah, maybe you can say something to that again, because I found that so important, that it's not just about me tending my vision. Of course I need to follow my calling, of course. And it's also that it's not just for me, but it's for all, and it's important that we are tending it together.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about vision is that when we find our calling, when we find that path that leads to our gifts really coming out and a sense of vision that guides us, it's never because it's for us as individuals. It's never a selfish thing. It's always in service to something much bigger than us. It's almost invariably in service to helping other people, helping the earth, helping the future generations. It's like that's where it gets the strongest. And because it isn't, my vision isn't for me, like my vision is for you and for all your listeners. Like it really doesn't help me to be connected just to me, right? Connection doesn't really do anything if it's just me alone. I could not be here if it wasn't for the mentoring of somebody like Tom Brown and my grandmothers too. I have to give them credit because they were the ones who made me ready the day that he came and, you know, interviewed me, so to speak, right? To see, does this boy have what it takes to go on this journey? And we, as people who are trying to find our calling and our gift, we really need other people to help us reflect on that. Because in my whole journey as, you know, doing this work, this path of life, it's not always been easy. I haven't always done the right thing, so to speak, right? Like I'll be very stubborn in my head about how I have to do something. But my head is kind of like a trickster. My thinking brain is a trickster. And then I would do things and force myself to make it work and then push my way through and cause pain for other people because I'm grumpy while I'm doing it, you know. And then I have an elder like Ingwe who reflects to me. You know, he hears my struggle. He sees the concentric rings, the waves I'm creating because I'm going at this in such a stubborn way, such a I know everything, I know what's right for me kind of way, right? And I have these hard times and I create hard times. Ingwe hears the whole thing, you know, and he listens because he's listening like Tom listens. I find myself weeping because I start to realize my own foolishness because I'm saying things out loud that I wouldn't allow myself to think when I'm alone. but they're coming out because this grandfather is listening with such a big heart and compassion. And he says, well, Jon, you remind Yngwie of when he was a young man like you. You know everything when you're in your 20s. He says, but then you think to yourself, your father didn't know a thing, but when you're older, you realize how much he really understood, and you get this perspective, right? And it's reflected to you. And he's not making me feel bad for the mistakes I'm making, but he's really letting me speak them out and have realizations of my own. And I start to let go of some of these layers of, I could just call them ego, really. It's just ego, right? And it's coming from insecurity. It's coming from my fear that I'm not good enough or I'm not smart enough. I'm still trying to please my parents' friends who were making fun of me when I started this path. And now I'm trying to show them I know what I'm doing. Like I had to go through a lot of that. And as a visionary, it's like, you follow this path, you're just going to get hammered on the anvil. It's not easy. And without elders, I don't know how I could have done it. I don't know if I would have lasted, right? Having others to reflect to me, to pick me up when I fall down and kind of brush me off and help me get up on my feet again and move forward without feeling shame that I went through a difficult time, right? We need each other. We can't do this connection thing without each other. It doesn't make sense without each other. It's just a weird idea otherwise, right? But with each other, we can build this beautiful web and of mutual support and kindness and care, and we can help each other along the way and help lift each other up. Which I know that's what you're doing with this lovely podcast. But I am doing the same thing in my podcast. I want to lift other people up, right? I want them to tell their story. I want to be a listening ear for their story, just like Yngwie was for me, or Tom was for me. And so you're doing people a great service by offering the opportunity for them to tell their story.
Yeah, great. Wow, beautiful. Yeah, and maybe one last thing to that. When people are so inspired to go deeper, how could they connect with you? I don't want to say your work because, as we already found, it's maybe just about, your being, your doing, what you're sharing. So what could be ways to connect?
The best way to get in touch with us is livingconnectionfirst.net. And you probably have show notes. You could just put that link in there for people. We often do things that people can attend, and we try to make things available for people to check out. And occasionally we run classes, and then we have our online village for people who are really committed to this mentoring path, this nature connection path. But yeah, that's what we're doing. I've got books and other stuff, but that's all. You'll find it all there. If you go to livingconnectionfirst.net.
Great. Wow, Jon, thank you so much for sharing, for your being. It was really lovely for me to really to connect with you and to hang out. Really to just listen and maybe also, as I said at the beginning, to dive deeper into more of you and more of the connections web in a way, which is already there and behind you. And I mean, as you said, from your beginning to where you are now, I can really feel this axis of what you said, like the axis that came into the HUs later on, like the southeast and the northwest. In a way, I feel like we dived in a lot into that axis, like with your stories from your childhood and the passion and curiosity, and then also how important the elders are, and also now, of course, where you are also more now in your age or phase of your life. So I feel there's something in it. And maybe we just leave it there, because this is also for others to discover what's in this axis.
True that.
Yeah. So I'm just very grateful for our conversation.
Me too, Yulia. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And of course, thank you for all that listened and have been willing to be touched and connect with us.
Ja, ich hoffe, du konntest richtig viel für dich aus dieser Folge mitnehmen und ja, was auch immer vielleicht sich dadurch bei dir bewegt hat oder auch gezeigt hat. Ja, vielleicht magst du damit raus in die Natur gehen und einfach mal das nachklingen zu lassen, ohne das verstehen zu müssen oder daraus was machen zu müssen. Vielleicht gibt es auch jemanden, dem du was teilen magst, wo du das Gefühl hast, boah, das ist es, was mich voll berührt hat. Dann, ja, vielleicht gibt es jemanden, der gerade in deiner Nähe ist, dem du das teilen magst. Oder auch einfach an der Natur, dass du da jemanden, ein Gegenüber findest, mit dem du das teilst. Ja, und natürlich teil voll gerne, wenn du was möchtest, auch hier mit mir, mit uns. Und ja, alle wichtigen Infos sind hier auch nochmal unten in den Shownotes. Kannst du ja die Links finden und Bücher und was auch immer noch findest du dort. So, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And whatever came up for you, whatever moved in you, whatever, yeah, maybe new insights or, yeah, whatever is there. Maybe you feel the calling to go out in nature with that and just let it be, like just be with it. You don't have to do anything with that, just be with it how it is. And give it space, give it room, and nourish it maybe also in a way by doing that. And yeah, maybe you also want to share something with a person in your life. You just feel like, okay, actually I need to talk about it with somebody, then do that. Or maybe you find some kind of being in nature where you feel like I want to tell it to this being, maybe a tree or a river or whatever you feel called to go, or you just want to write it down for yourself. So yeah, go and do whatever feels right for you. And of course, if you like, you can just send me an email to share it, because I really feel there's so much medicine in it and power in it if we are sharing stories with each other and things with each other, so then it can become more feasible for ourselves, and maybe there come new insights for ourselves through it. Thank you.